The title of this message is, Did Jesus Actually Die? So today is Good Friday, also known as Holy Friday. And Good Friday is the Friday immediately preceding Easter Sunday. Now traditionally it's celebrated as the day on which Jesus was crucified. But if he was crucified, why is it known as Good Friday? What's good about it, right? What happened wasn't good, obviously, but the outcome was good. And we see that in Romans 5:8 and 1 Peter 3:18. But, crucial question, did Jesus actually die? Now, the resurrection of Jesus needs to be investigated, obviously, because if the resurrection isn't true, Christianity isn't true. However, the death of Christ is the necessary prerequisite to his resurrection. After all, another monotheistic religion, Islam, denies that Jesus died on the cross. Also, many skeptics challenge the reality of Christ's death. So, did Jesus actually die? Well, to begin, may the evidence be examined from the beginning. The Old Testament predicted that the Messiah would die. And we see that in Psalm 22:16, Isaiah 53, verses 5 to 10, Daniel 9:26, and Zechariah 12:10. Now, Jesus fulfilled this and nearly about 100 other Old Testament prophecies about the Messiah. Jesus also predicted many times during his ministry that he was going to die and rise again. And you can see that in Matthew 12, verse 40, and Matthew 17, 22 to 23, Mark 8:31, John 2:19 to 21, John 10:10 to 11. But of course, now that's all dependent upon whether the Bible is accurate and reliable. And it is. You'll have to see my other article for that. It's called, Is the Bible Accurate and Reliable? But moving on, because we've already done that, the Bible is accurate and reliable. So apart from prophecies, the crucifixion itself is the real nitty-gritty truth. Jesus' injuries made death unavoidable. Not only did Jesus not sleep the night before he was crucified, but he was also beaten, whipped, with chunks of flesh being ripped out, and he even collapsed while being forced to carry his own cross. Now, this prelude to the crucifixion alone was life-draining. Further, the nature of the crucifixion assured death. So, in 1968, an ancient burial site was uncovered in Jerusalem containing about 35 bodies. It was determined that most of those bodies had suffered violent deaths in the Jewish uprising against Rome in 70 AD. And one of the bodies, and the body was known as Yehohanan bin Hagolgol or something. I'm not good at pronouncing that, I am so sorry. But this person, in one of the bodies, was found a 7-inch nail driven through both his feet. The feet had been turned outward so that the square nail could be hammered through at the heel, just inside the Achilles tendon. Now this would have bowed the legs outward as well so that they couldn't have been used for support on the cross. The legs were crushed, and that is consistent with the common use of the Roman crucifixion. Death by crucifixion is often, death by suffocation, asphyxiation. Crucifixion victims had to lift themselves to free the chest muscles, and when they grew too weak to do so, they died by suffocation. Breathing is restricted with the arms raised, hence why the hands were nailed to the horizontal beam of the cross. Now, all these details from this discovery confirms the New Testament description of crucifixion. Jesus hung on the cross for about 6 hours. See that in Mark 15, verses 25 and 33. And he hung on the cross for about 6 hours while bleeding from the wounds in his hands, feet, and his scalp from where the crown of thorns had been shoved on his head. Now, the amount of blood that had drained from these wounds within a 6-hour span of time, it would have been an amount of life that was drained. Well, further, Jesus' side was pierced with a spear. From this wound flowed a mixture of blood and water. You read that in John 19:34. And that is a proof that physical death had indeed occurred. Modern medical experts would agree with this. An article in the Journal of the American Medical Association concluded this: clearly, the weight of historical and medical evidence indicates that Jesus was dead before the wound to his side was inflicted, and supports the traditional view that the spear thrust between his right rib probably perforated not only the right lung but also the pericardium and heart, and thereby ensured his death. Accordingly, interpretations based on the assumptions that Jesus did not die on the cross appear to be at odds with modern medical knowledge. Now, you can also see the article from the Journal of Forensic and Legal Medicine, which states the cause of death is pulmonary embolism, cardiac rupture, suspension trauma, asphyxiation, fatal stab wound, and shock. But each wound apparently was intended to produce intense agony, and the contributing causes of death were numerous. Now, the Roman soldiers were accustomed to a crucifixion and death, and they pronounced Jesus dead. And you see that in Mark 15, verses 44 to 45. And though it was common practice to break the legs of the victim in order to speed up death, and they did that because a person would no longer be able to support himself to breathe, although it was common practice to do that, the Roman soldiers did not believe it was necessary to break the legs of Jesus. You read that in John 19:33. They did that. They didn't need to break his legs because he was already dead. Further, Pilate made sure Jesus was dead prior to giving the corpse to Joseph of Arimathea before to be buried. And that's also the same, Mark 15, verses 44 to 45. Jesus had also been placed in a sealed tomb for 3 days. You can see that in Matthew 27, verse 60, and John 19, verses 39 to 40. Even if Jesus had somehow not died from his injuries and or loss of blood by then, the lack of food, water, and medical treatment would certainly have brought death. And finally, several non-Christian historians and writers from the 1st and 2nd centuries recorded the death of Christ as indisputable fact. Among these are the Talmud, Josephus, which Jewish historian, and Cornelius Tacitus, which was a Roman historian. But for a very detailed argument, I recommend you read The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus by Dr. Gary R. Habermas and Michael R. Licona. It's really detailed, but even what I've given is enough. But in conclusion, the historical evidence for Christ's death is greater than that for almost any other event in the ancient world. We can conclude with certainty that Christ Jesus of Nazareth died a physical death and was sealed in a tomb. However, that's not the end of the story. The next investigation in my other video is the resurrection of Jesus authentic? And I thought it was appropriate to wear this shirt because, well, as the Goonies say, Goonies never say die. And apparently, Jesus didn't either. Death did not hold Jesus down.